Happy Friday, guys. The book I have for you today for First Chapter Friday is called Stuffed by Liz Braswell. And this book is not what you would expect. It's about a boy named Clark who is almost 11. He's in 5th grade. And he's your typical almost 11-year-old, except for one thing. Clark loves stuffed animals. He considers them his friends. His mom wants him to be more normal, and she wants to get rid of all of his stuffed animals, but for some reason he has this feeling that his stuffed friends are important, and he doesn't know why, but he just knows that they're important and that he can't get rid of them. And it turns out that he's right, because Clark's dad comes under attack by a monster called a King Durker. And the only people, or things should I say, that can save Clark's dad are Clark's stuffed animals. Now, one stuffed animal in particular, whose name is Foon, is an old sock puppet that was made by Clark's grandmother and given to him. So these animals, stuffed animals that come to life, they're called stuffies. And Foon is a newly minted, he's like a fresh stuffy because he's just recently learned how to kind of animate himself. And so this book is about how you find friends in the strangest places. And you never know when you're going to need those stuffed animals of yours. I'm going to do something a little different. There's actually a prologue here, and I'm going to read that. And then this book is written in multiple perspectives, so it switches back and forth. One chapter is from Clark's point of view. The next chapter is from Foon, the Stuffy's point of view. And so I'm going to actually read you the prologue, and then I'm going to read you the first 2 chapters, because the first chapter is from Clark's point of view, and the second chapter is from Foon's point of view. So here we go. A package arrives. Bob! Bob! There's a package for you. The doorbell hadn't been rung, and the quick footsteps of the postwoman couldn't be heard as she trotted away from the house and back to the safety of her truck. If Mrs. Smith hadn't been opening the door to check on the whimsical spring weather, the brown cardboard box might have sat there all day. I think it's from your parents. She pulled the box inside, and the whole Smith family gathered around it. Mrs. and Mr. and their children, Clark and Anna. The handwriting on the package was deliberate and neat, the return stamp from California. Unmistakably Grandma and Grandpa Smith. Sometimes they sent postcards from the beach or oranges from their backyard tree. There was something decidedly not fresh or beachy about this strange box. Mr. Smith frowned, and then he went to work ripping off the old-fashioned paper tape. When he finally managed to open the flaps, a musty, mildewed puff of air exploded out of it. "Whoa!" Anna said, leaning over to look. Inside were bits and pieces of Mr. Smith's childhood, discolored and worn. There was a paperweight, a plastic spaceship, some books without covers, a few weird little figurines. Mrs. Smith reached in and deftly took out a letter, the only recent object in the pile. It said, "Going through some old stuff, thought you'd like to have them." Oh. Well, that's nice. Mrs. Smith was a very neat person, and she liked things that smelled of lemons, not mildew. "Oh, cool. Can I look at them?" Clark asked, reaching in to grab the figurines. But Mr. Smith was regarding the items with a look less like delight and more like horror. His eyes were very far away. Let's leave your dad alone for a few minutes to go through this stuff by himself, Mrs. Smith suggested gently. He'll call you when he's ready to share. Disappointed, but unprotesting, Clark and Anna followed her glumly out of the room, leaving their father with the box. He didn't move for a long time, and finally he reached in with reluctant hands and picked up a single object. The paperweight. The thing that was under it rose up like a coil of smoke. Less surprised than resigned, Mr. Smith didn't even cry out when the smoke descended on him. Chapter 1. Night. Tomorrow, Clark thought, summer begins. Tomorrow, summer stretched 3 green months into the future, wide and open like a storybook landscape, or like a monopoly board with the months in one pleasant block waiting for hotels. 4th grade ended tomorrow. A nearly infinite sunny time approached for Clark, full of reading as many books as he wanted, playing in the backyard until he was called in, afternoons at the pool, and, if he was lucky, sometimes the lake. Time would be marked by meals, not bells, and meals would sometimes be picnics or surprise outings to the Tasty-Freeze. Most importantly, summer meant the longest days and the shortest nights. But all that began tomorrow. Right now, it was still tonight, and night was creeping in. Mrs. Smith speared a ravioli on her fork, a bright grin on her face. So, tomorrow, last day of school. What next, team? What are your big plans for June, July, and August? Clark's sister Anna rolled her heavily made-up eyes and nudged him in the stomach with her elbow. She was 16, but she mostly treated him like an equal. Clark rolled his eyes back at her. It was a nice distraction from watching the light fade beyond the windows. Mrs. Smith looked at Mr. Smith, but Mr. Smith did not return her look. He just spooned ravioli into his mouth, trying not to get any sauce on his mustache. Come on, guys, Mrs. Smith tried again. You have all of summer ahead of you. Big plans, big projects. The world is your oyster. I thought I'd take up taxidermy, said Anna. Miss Smith, her mother growled, don't even joke. Clark knew that Anna would probably do the same thing she did every summer. She would wear her seasonally inappropriate dark and heavy clothes and hang around with her friends who were always inappropriate, no matter what season it was. She wouldn't really do anything unless she could get one of the coveted jobs at Hot Topic. What about you, Clark? His mother asked. Well, first I'm going to finish that Dragons of the Realm series, and after that I'll try Cursed Child again. If you let me, I'm going to the library every day on my bike. He was so excited by the imaginary stack of books waiting for him that at first he didn't notice his audience's reaction. His mother was staring at him, silently. So was his dad, but his gaze was slightly off-center. Whoops. He should have said something like, learn to swim the breaststroke properly or teach myself chess. But the opportunity was past. Mrs. Smith took a deep breath. You guys, come on. You're young. This is summer. You're kids. Don't waste it. We're not wasting it, Anna drawled. We're doing exactly what we're supposed to do. As kids, hang out and have fun. Mrs. Smith narrowed her eyes and bit her lip, but she didn't say anything. Mr. Smith just kept eating his ravioli. After TV, it was time for bed. It's still a school night, no partying yet, said his mom. Darkness, finally, and completely overcame the yard outside. Clark brushed his teeth as fast as he could, and he peed, remembering to lower the seat carefully so it didn't crash. He ran a hand through his shaggy brown hair to keep it from becoming too tangled or weird by morning, forcing Mom to bring out the brush. In his parents' bathroom, Mrs. Smith was cleaning her own teeth for exactly 2 minutes with the help of a timer. She smiled at him with a foamy mouth. "Good night, Clark." "Good night, Mom." He was sort of glad that she couldn't kiss him on the head and sort of wished that she would. His father lay in bed already, looking at the ceiling, not doing anything. In his work clothes. The TV was on, but it was silent. It just flooded the room with a fluttering of sickly blue light. And then, for just a moment, it looked like there was like a dim cloud above the bed, as if his dad were like smoking. But there was no smell, and of course Mr. and Mrs. Smith didn't smoke. But the haze like swirled slowly and oozily above him. When Clark squinted, trying to look directly at it, the smoke was gone, like it wasn't there at all. But the room seemed darker and gloomier now, and all the colors looked dimmer, and the silence was overwhelming. "Good night, Dad," Clark called out, more loudly than he really needed to. "Good night. Love you," his dad said back, but he was still just staring at the ceiling. Clark made himself continue down the dark hall. Through her open door, he could see that Anna was also lying in her bed in her day clothes, but she was on her phone, fingers flying over the screen. Actually doing something, sort of. "Good night," he said. "Good night, Squirt," she said, without bothering to look up. But there was still enough love in that. It got Clark the last few feet down the hall to his own room. He turned on the light, he changed into his video game pajamas, and he closed the door, leaving it open the barest crack, of course. And then, before turning off the light again, he arranged his stuffed animals. In the center of his bed, he put his two biggest, Winkum on the right and Draco on the left. Winkum was his most beloved old horse and always held this position of honor. Draco, powerful with his fiery red felt breath and spiky tail, guarded the left side of Clark. Next, and farther out from them, were Bo Bear and Pog, always together. Pog was a small bunny, lanky and old and easily transportable, but not very strong. And then on the other side was the relatively new Dark Horse, whose fur was still smooth and whose flanks rippled with muscle. Beyond them were Flapfish and Dynamo, the Diprotodon, and Gribble, and Kevin, and Ducky, and Raccoon, and Baz. Then on the outside edges were the smallest stuffed animals. They were random, cheap, weird creatures given to Clark by his uncle or won at a claw machine. You know, like the ones he would miss less if anything happened. And this was a shameful thing to admit, but it was also the truth. All of the animals were faced outward, away from where Clark would lie in the middle, safely between Winkum and Draco, so they could watch. They could watch the closet door, the windows, the scary cold floor that he couldn't see from his pillow. They could watch the shadowed corners, and they were always on the lookout for monsters. Once everyone was in his or her proper position, Clark turned off the light and hopped carefully into his place in the center. He would have preferred to hug Winkum facing him because it was more comfortable, but the horse needed to keep an eye out, so his tail just tickled Clark's neck. That's just the way it was. Then Clark said his good nights to everyone that he hadn't been able to tell personally. He couldn't say this for certain, but he felt that this little ritual also kept the monsters away. Good night, Grandma and Grandpa Smith, who were in California. Good night, Grandma Markham, who was just over in Hicksville. Goodnight, Grandpa Ken, who was wherever people were when they died. Goodnight, Aaron and Nathan, who were the cousins he never got to see. Goodnight, Chantal, Yankees rule, socks drool, who was his best friend from kindergarten and had just moved to Boston. And then, even though he knew they weren't real and he knew it was childish, he said goodnight to the others. "Goodnight, Superman and Batman," he whispered. Neither of them had parents to say goodnight to them, and maybe they missed it, even after becoming grown-up heroes. Goodnight, Wonder Woman, even though she did have a mom. And then finally Clark was able to snuggle down between his two walls of stuffed animals, sheets and covers pulled suffocatingly overhead, and he drifted off, dreaming of summer. Foon. Okay, you don't see me here 'cause I am not here yet. You see others, but not me. I am not yet. Chapter 2. Still Night. The clock said 4:37 a.m. in bright red. Clark never got up to pee and was not sure what had woken him, but he quickly counted his stuffed animals, looking left and right as his eyes adjusted. Baz, the tiny monkey. He'd been on the farthest outside to the left, and now he was gone. Clark's heart began to race. He really didn't want to stick his head back out of the blankets and pillows, but the little stuffed animal needed him. He closed his eyes and he tried to summon a teaspoon of courage. He thought of every cool and brave comic book character he had ever loved, and then he peeped over to the side of the bed and he looked. And there on the floor lay Baz, simply fallen out of bed. But was it that simple? Because he had been on the other side of Clark at the beginning of the night, on the part facing the wall, not the windows. So how did he wind up on the wrong side? It wasn't possible. I mean, at least the little guy looked all right. But was the closet door open to crack? That wasn't good. Clark had made sure it was closed before going to sleep, like he always did, just like he always made sure his bedroom door was always left open a crack. It didn't matter. He wasn't going to think about it. There was a rescue to be done. Clark squirmed around, keeping as much of his body under the blankets as he could. Eventually, he managed to angle himself so that only his torso stuck out over the side of the bed. His carefully ordered lineup of stuffed animals was shattered, and a couple of guys were temporarily squished, but thankfully no one else fell over the side. He braced his toes over the mattress edge to keep from falling to the floor himself, and with a quick swipe he grabbed Baz by the tail. He managed to do this without even touching the ground or anything else, and then he threw himself back into the middle of the bed with a ninja-like roll. The bed sheets tangled around his legs like ropes. Stuffed animals flew, but none fell. Everyone, including the little monkey and Clark himself, was safe. He held up Baz and he viewed him critically. Was one eye pulled slightly, tearing the cloth around it? Had it been that way before? Was his painted nose scratched? Why was there dust all over him? Like hairy, big dust. Like he'd fallen off the bed and then been dragged underneath it to the other side. Clark carefully wiped off the tiny monkey and tucked him back in, a little closer to the center this time. But he was still facing out. He was still watching. Because there was still more night before there would be morning. So, if you think Stuffed might be a book that you're interested in continuing to read, make sure you go to our Destiny catalog, put it on hold, and then Miss McLam will deliver it right to your door. I hope you guys have a really great weekend, and I'll see you next week for another First Chapter Friday. The book I have for you today for First Chapter Friday is called Stuffed.